Hi, I'm Heather. I'm a nutritionist and a GAPS practitioner, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about dairy on the GAPS diet. Dairy is kind of a taboo food. A lot of people just assume it's healthier to avoid dairy altogether. A lot of children with autism on the spectrum react to casein, so it's very common to just eliminate dairy. It's a no-go zone. But I really want to dive into it and talk a little bit more about it because dairy can actually be a super healing food and an integral part of your journey on GAPS. So the first thing I want to talk about is there are different types of dairy. A lot of people initially, when their gut is inflamed and they're eating dairy from what Dr. Natasha McBride calls Frankenstein cows, they're cows that are specifically bred to make a ton of milk, and then they get mastitis and they have pus and blood in their milk because they're so sick. They're given routine antibiotics and steroids and yada yada yada. GMO feed, they're disgusting, disgusting milk from really sick cows. So when people have that and it's not even in a fermented state at all, of course you're going to react. You're going to react to those proteins. You're going to react to a host of everything in the milk. So sorry about the little cute bubby noises. There we go. But that is a totally different product from like a Jersey cow that's fed an organic diet, just roaming on the pasture, drinking clean water, not given routine antibiotics and vaccinations and all that, and excess hormones and steroids and everything. When you take that raw milk that's already full of enzymes and probiotics and beneficial bacteria, and then you culture that, and the casein, those difficult to digest proteins, and and the lactose get broken down, it's a totally different product, completely different. So much easier to digest, full of beneficial bacteria. It's not having those harmful compounds in it. And it's from like purebred heritage cows. So higher quality milk, higher quality starting point, and then you're fermenting it further and making it a really nutrient dense food. So I am not in the camp of just avoid dairy. It's a terrible food. I don't believe that at all. God made dairy. I believe in nature over, chemicals and genetically modified soybeans turned into milk or oat milk or something like that. But that being said, it's really important to introduce it carefully. So another reason I don't suggest just avoiding it to avoid it, unless you really have to, is as your gut is healing, something you may have not been able to tolerate 6 weeks or 6 months ago, you may be able to tolerate now that the gut lining is healing and sealing through the GAPS diet, through the removal of those irritating foods and the addition of the meat stalks and the probiotics. Now that your gut lining is healing, that dairy might not be leaking into the bloodstream any longer, and your immune system may stop attacking it. So it's always good to really reevaluate and see if dairy is still a problem, because if you can introduce it, some of the fermented dairy is so healing to your gut and your microbiome. Kefir is one of the most powerful nutrient-dense foods in the world. I mean, not only does it have many species and strains of beneficial bacteria, it has many beneficial strains and species of beneficial yeasts. It's really, really good, and it actually drowns out the pathogenic yeasts like Candida specifically. It's drowns out Clostridia. It's like the variety of species and strains in that there's over 30 to 50. And then when you look at the actual probiotic count, the amount of bacteria in that, it's like 50 billion per tablespoon. It's unreal. And it is so, so good at healing the gut. So you don't want to just throw out dairy because it's dairy and you've heard dairy is inflammatory. You really want to look at the quality, how it's prepared, and then hopefully you can introduce it, because even if it takes a year or 2 years, it's so good to get to the point where you can have little bits of kefir or little bits of raw yogurt or the whey. It's going to be so healing, and it's delicious. My husband was suffering from migraines for a long time, and we did GAPS for him. We did intro, and I really believe that raw milk kefir was the most healing food for him. He was absolutely downing it, and it did give him migraines initially because it's such a powerhouse. It's like an explosion in your gut, killing off bad bacteria and pathogenic yeasts, but it was extremely fundamental in his healing and his journey. So all that to say, if you're on the introduction diet, that is like an intensive 6-stage diet where you're doing tons of meat stock, well-cooked meats, very slowly introducing new foods. In that case, the gut lining is healing and sealing rather quickly. So you can introduce dairy almost right away and see if you react to it. And you're going to be doing that with just a bit of whey from strained yogurt, not from the strained kefir. So whey is that liquid. If you were to take some raw milk and make some yogurt, which you can check out the video I did on how to make GAPS yogurt, and then you get that liquid, the golden liquid, strained from the actual like milk proteins, that's what you would introduce. And many people react well because they're giving such a good amount of time to really healing that gut lining. But if you are doing the full GAPS diet, it's recommended to avoid dairy for the first month to 6 weeks before slowly introducing it. Even if you don't have an anaphylactic allergy or a sensitivity, or you never thought you had a dairy allergy, it's really important to wait to get that slow healing on the full GAPS diet for at least 6 weeks before introducing dairy. So the first food we introduce, dairy speaking, is going to be ghee, which is clarified butter. And that's really high fat, no lactose in it, no casein in it. Most people do really well with that. And then if you do well with that, you can introduce butter, which has a little bit of lactose in it, very high fat, really nourishing. And then you are going to move to either sour cream or homemade yogurt. And those both have really similar cultures in. It's just the sour cream is going to be more beneficial for people with constipation because it's so high fat. It kind of lubricates the gut lining and really helps get things moving, where the yogurt would be more towards someone who has diarrhea. So at that stage, you go ghee, then butter, and then you pick between sour cream or yogurt. Sour cream is for diarrhea. Yogurt is a higher protein, so it has more of a constipating effect, generally speaking. Some people it doesn't, but if you're prone to diarrhea, definitely go for the yogurt, that high protein, so that you're not encouraging more loose stools. And after those are really, they're introduced, you're doing well, you're increasing the amount, and you're no longer having crazy die-off from it, then you can move to kefir. And kefir is the last homemade cultured food that you're doing because it is so intense. It is so strong. It has so much beneficial bacteria, beneficial yeasts. It is like a bomb in your gut. And if you just start straight up with kefir, you can have crazy reactions, tons and tons of die-off, and it probably just won't be a pretty picture. So I recommend introducing that super slowly, like 1 drop a day, and increase to a teaspoon and 2 teaspoons. And if you start feeling crazy, or you're having mental health symptoms or anxiety or depression or racing heart or any other regression, you just slow down. And so a lot of people, one question I want to address as well is, am I having a reaction to dairy? Is it a food sensitivity or is it die-off? So this is generally speaking, if it's butter or ghee, it's more likely to be a food sensitivity because they're not high probiotic foods. On the other hand, if it's the kefir, the yogurt, or the sour cream you're reacting to, like let's say you do great with ghee, great with butter, and then you introduce a little bit of that sour cream or yogurt. In both of those cases, they're fermented for 24 hours. That lactose and the casein is broken down. They should be super easy to digest. In those cases, it's probably more likely to be die-off because you're getting a reaction when you introduce all these probiotic foods, where the butter and ghee don't really have probiotics, so they're not really going to be causing die-off. But let's say you do good on both those, and then you introduce yogurt, and you all of a sudden feel crazy. Just back up on the amount. It's probably not a food allergy or sensitivity. It's probably that die-off, which is a good sign, but you just don't want to overwhelm your system. You want it to be gradual die-off. Feeling those symptoms, maybe having a bit of regression, but you don't want it to be like a full-on regression because all of these pathogens are dying off. And then, yes, you can move on to kefir after that, and like I said, very, very slowly. After that, you can strain the kefir, which is like a homemade cottage cheese. And then after that, you can try some of the raw cheeses, like raw cheddar, aged cheddar. And if you do well with those, that's great. And your dairy intolerance is solved, and that shows that your gut lining is healing and sealing really well. So all that to say, dairy can be a tricky food. A lot of people just assume dairy, oh, it's inflammatory. A lot of those studies that show that dairy is inflammatory are from sick cows. The milk's not cultured. It's got tons of antibiotics and hormones and all that in. So yes, that's going to be inflammatory. But these homemade cultured foods, may actually be healing, and the symptoms you may be experiencing may actually just be die-off, which is showing you're moving in the right direction. So I hope that's not too confusing. It's very important to introduce it slowly. I highly recommend having a food journal so you can write down when you introduce 1 drop of sour cream and, you know, see how you go, and monitor your results for 3 days and then increase the dose or move on to something else. So I hope that's helpful. I would love to know if you're doing dairy on the GAPS diet, how you introduced it, how you're going with it, and for most people it's a really nice addition. So if you don't have to stay away from it, I wouldn't, because who doesn't want some butter, you know, on their almond flour bread or in their soup? It's absolutely delicious. So thanks for watching my video. I'd love if you liked or shared, and yeah, thanks for watching. Hi, thanks for watching my video. You can feel free to comment or like below, or you can follow me on Instagram or on my website.